everyone. We are very happy to have you today. Thank you for joining us for this session, this new session about role mining, this new webinar. We had a previous session, an introduction to role mining a couple of weeks before. And today we'll focus on methodology and the main steps of a role mining project. So I'm Nicolas Drouot, in charge of the marketing for Brainwave GRC, and today Khadija is joining me for this session. Hi, Khadija.
Hi, Nicolas. So just to introduce myself quickly, my name is Khadija El Afrit, and I've been a consultant in Brainwave's professional services team for 6 months now. And before I joined Brainwave, I used to work also in consulting firms handling identity and access management related projects. And I also contributed to the new role mining as a service offer that Nicolas will tell you more about for the next webinars.
Yes, that's right. So a few words about Brainwave GRC. So we are a French software vendor specialized in identity analytics. So our services include access inventory, access review, access control automation, and of course, role mining, which is today's topic. So we have quite a lot of very nice customer references around the globe, and they have given us a 5-star rating on Gartner Peer Insights, which we are very proud of. Which we are very proud of. But let's dive into today's topic. So, role mining, directly managing permission is a complex task, of course. You could have quite a lot of permissions to manage, sometimes 10 to sometimes 100 rights to manage individually for each user, which requires a lot of actions. It can take time. It increases the potential risk to make mistakes. So that's why we created roles. That's why roles are here for, of course. The purpose of roles is to simplify the management of access rights, because the role embed quite a number of accesses, and you just need to grant a role to give access to a high number of resources directly. So it has a lot of advantages. It improves the user experience because it simplified the management actions required to manage access rights, but as well it provides business information to the business teams to understand what they are doing, which access are they granting to who. It improves the security, of course, because it reduces the risks to make errors when granting access to users, and it simplifies compliance because you just need to review the roles instead of reviewing accesses individually for each user. So you just need to, on one hand, to review the roles, and on the other hand, you can review the content of the roles, which is much easier to do. So, Khadija, what can you tell us about how can we create roles?
Thanks for that excellent question, Nicolas. So in terms of role mining, there are traditionally two kinds of approaches that one can use within a role mining project. The first one would be what we call a bottom-up approach. That can be performed, for example, with an identity and access management tool where a role mining module or license would be available. So in that kind of approach, the starting point is the identification of rights that are granted to several people within a same organization, or several people who share the same job function, or that have any other criteria in common. And based on these combinations of permissions that are granted to the same people, then the identification of these clusters could be a basis to constitute roles to be industrialized for future newcomers. So that approach is pretty simple, pretty straightforward, since it comes since it starts off the access rights that are currently granted to your employees. But there can be two drawbacks, two major drawbacks to this approach. The first one is that since you're basing your role model off of existing access rights, then if you have any quality issues in these access rights that are granted, for example, if you have many users who have duplicated or copied and paste entitlements, because one would just request the same entitlements as their colleague when they arrive in the company, then you will end up with roles containing lots of entitlements, some of which may not be relevant anymore, some of which may be obsolete, or some of which may even be pretty sensitive and grant access to too many resources, way more resources than the person actually needs to perform their function. The second drawback to this approach is the fact that if you perform a bottom-up role model, you will depend on the list of applications that are available in your identity and access management solution if you're using that kind of application to perform your role mining. So if you already have hundreds of applications that are onboarded in your identity and access management catalog, that can be fine, of course. You can already have a solid basis, to constitute your roles. But if you're just starting in your identity and access management journey, if your IAM solution only has 3, 4, or 10 applications onboarded, and especially if you work in the industry in factoring and other kinds of companies where you may have lots of engineering applications that may not always be known by the information system teams, then the scope of your roles may not be relevant enough and may not have enough applications in order to constitute business roles and technical roles that will actually make it more efficient for you to grant accesses to your employees. So that's for the bottom-up approach. The second approach we can think of when it comes to role mining is what we call a top-down approach. So instead of starting from what is already there, the focus point of a top-down approach will be to ask yourself what should be granted to your employees. So basically, that approach consists in identifying your core business functions or your core organizations, and for each of them, identify what theoretical rights should be granted to all the employees that are members of these organizations or all the employees who have that specific job function. This top-down approach may or may not be used with a specific software. In most of my feedback and most of my colleagues' feedback, the top-down approach was used with Excel files or other kinds of databases, which can lead up to what you're seeing right now in your screen, which is an example that's actually a true story. This screenshot of an Excel file with thousands and thousands of rows and columns was actually a role mining Excel file used for previous clients back in the day, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, who tried a top-down approach like that, and constituting this file took up to 2 years. And long story short, the roles that were created with this file were obsolete even before they went to production, because in the meantime, there were changes in the organization, changes in the application, in the application systems, et cetera, et cetera. So that you can quickly end up with that kind of impossible to read Excel file if you use a top-down approach without proper tooling. So using each one of these approaches separately may not grant you the best results. And what we recommend in Brainwave, what we've seen working the best for our clients over the 10 years that Brainwave has been in existence, is to combine a top-down and a bottom-up approach to constitute your role model. So basically, what we suggest to our customers is to combine both a proper tool, a proper software that will give you a relevant view of your combination of entitlements that are often given to users, and a top-down approach, meaning workshops and some expertise that we will help you with in order to make the best of the clusters of entitlements that are shown by the tool, and to identify the relevant clusters to turn into roles with your business stakeholders' help. So, over the next slide, we'll give you a quick view of how it can be rolled out within a role mining project. So basically, if we divide a role mining standard project in 3 phases, we start off with a starting phase where you would basically define the scope of your role mining project. And in the starting phase, you will have both top-down and bottom-up approaches that can be combined. For the top-down parts, you'll need the expertise of identity and access management consultants, of your business stakeholders, to define the proper scope of your role mining project, both in terms of applications to include in your roles and to include and organizations or groups of people to include in the scope of the project. In the starting phase, you'll also have to onboard both your application teams, your technical experts, and your business stakeholders, which is key. We'll see that later on to make sure that the project will be a success. In terms of bottom-up approach, in the starting phase, you also will need to perform the discovery and the integration of your application data within the proper tool that you will use to identify possible clusters of entitlements. And something we do ensure in Brainwave software is both the loading of application data and the data quality management and improvement. So it's possible to configure several sets of rules to make sure that both the data that you load from each application can be made standard in terms of regular expressions, in terms of formatting, etc. And also, we can implement several rules to make sure that your accounts and your identities will be properly reconciled. Or if you have orphan accounts, that you can provide rules to label them properly and keep this labeling or this reconciliation even after you refresh your application data. So after that first phase, we can move on to starting some workshops with your business stakeholders. So at that point, you're starting to have a set of data that has been made clean, that can be exploited in order to identify links between permissions and identities for multiple organizations. You can start highlighting some aggregates, some clusters of entitlements that are often granted together. And you can also benefit from some analytics if you have the proper tool for that. For example, to identify if some entitlements have been used recently for each user. If not, maybe they're not relevant to get into a future business role. So that's the kind of analytics that can be taken into account for your workshops with business stakeholders. So once you get this set of data, this reconciliation, and these aggregates that are provided and made visible in your application for the role mining project, then you can use that as an input for your workshops and provide both before and during the workshops some useful advice, some useful tips to your business stakeholders if they're unable to decide if a cluster should be turned into a role or not. Our consultants have some expertise and have had lots of customer feedback that can help depending on the industry you work in. And let's assume your role mining workshops worked fine. So combining both the expertise of your business stakeholders, the expertise of our consultants, and the proper tooling, you manage to find several roles that can be created and that can be implemented quickly and help reducing the number of accesses and the number of management activities that have to be done whenever there's a new joiner or a mover. So after these workshops, we would move to a third phase. So I'll let Nicolas maybe move on. Yeah, thank you. So a third phase of consolidation of your roles. So in that phase, you'll have several activities to close your project properly. You may need, so on a top-down and on a functional level, you'll need some reporting, of course, on the number of roles that you created, how many people they can cover, how many permissions they include, etc. And you'll also need to prepare some change management documents, some change management seminars, or other kinds of activities to raise awareness to your employees once the roles are created, in order to tell them how to use these roles in the future. And on a tool-based standpoint, once the roles are created in your role mining tool, the next step would naturally be to export them and publish them in your IAM catalog so that they can be either requested in the future or granted automatically, depending on the level of automation you can have in your IAM platform.
Thank you, Radija, for this presentation. So that's why we created role mining as a service. So we've been briefly mentioning this at the beginning of the session. Role mining as a service is a new service we've been announcing last Monday, so 2 days ago. It's going to be officially available in a couple of weeks, and it's condensing all the intelligence, the methodology, the experience of Brainwave in one tool available in the cloud to ensure that your role mining missions are going to be successful. So basically, in a couple of features, if we describe this new service in a few features, it embeds this two-way analysis. So this methodology that has been described by Khadija with the top-down and using the tool to create role to discuss within workshops. So this two-way to create roles. This role finder intelligence feature that is enables you in one click to create some suggestions of roles that you can discuss during the workshops with the business teams to see if they are relevant or not, if the content is relevant or not. So the idea is not to use them as they have been creating, but the idea is to discuss them in workshops. We've been adding this role mining advisor. This role mining advisor, it concentrates 10 years of Brainwave's experience in driving role mining projects. So it's giving you tips, advices, warnings, and as well a checklist to ensure you have been ticking all the boxes to of the main steps to make your role mining project progress and ensure you're not forgetting an important step that will lead you to the success of creating quality roles. And Radija has been mentioning as well the idea of managing the quality of the data within the tool. We have been embedding it in the tool and labeled it as the data quality manager. So the tool is providing quite a lot of very interesting features. We'll describe in the next session. Actually, we have a webinar dedicated to the demonstration of this new role mining as a service interface. It's going to be actually in 2 weeks' time, so we'll give you the information later on. But what does it look like as an interface? Here is a screenshot of the interface. I don't know if you want to give us more information about it, Khadija.
So this screenshot is mostly related to our on-premise software, the cloud version that Nicolas will present during the next webinar, maybe slightly different in terms of display. But basically, what you can see here is a crosstab that combines both the list of entitlements through several applications and the list of identities that are part of the same organization, the same department, for example. And so the boxes that are checked indicates that the person you see in the column already has the entitlement to the permission that you see in the row. And here, for example, you can already see that several clusters, several aggregates of permissions that are granted to the same people have been turned into roles. So these are the colored parts, the colored groups of entitlements. For example, here you can see that there's a valid group that has been turned into a role. So it looks like a basic role with 3 or 4 SAP permissions that are granted to the whole team, to like 15 or 20 people. And then there are other roles that are more restricted that apply to fewer people within the team, but that include way more SAP permissions, for example. So these are the green, orange, and yellow clusters. And in the right, you can see the names of roles that have been created out of these clusters. And if they've been created in the application, it's most probably because during the workshop with your business stakeholders, you will have shown them this crosstab with the groups of entitlements that are granted to the same people. And they told you, yes, this group should be turned into a role. And then you create the role live during the workshop in front of them. So actually, this interface gives you some visibility on entitlements that is pretty easy to navigate through. You can filter on the number of people you want to see, on the number of applications you want to include in this crosstab. You also have a progression bar at the top of the web page that indicates you the percentage of coverage that the roles you created already include. So here, for example, you can see that with only 4 or 5 roles, you can already cover 2/3 of the entitlements for this team in particular. So that can move pretty quickly, and you may need to create only 5 or 10 roles in order to cover most of the rights that are granted within your company. So that's the kind of view we offer with Brainwave software. So beyond this screenshot that we showed you, we like to get back to the methods for a role mining project and give you a quick comparison of the different kinds of tools that we discussed. So we told you about using a top-down approach with Excel only. We told you about using a bottom-up approach only with an IAM software. and we're presenting to you the ways that Brainwave software is able to combine both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So in terms of data feeding with a specific with these kinds of application. So in the past, in the projects that I may have been a witness of, or my colleagues have been involved into, we've seen that using Excel as a way to aggregate the data of your applications is properly it is just very inconvenient. There's no way of updating your data easily. For example, you have to perform all the correlation by yourself. Same goes for SQL databases or other kinds of manual tools with maybe just a slight difference in terms of performance. And with an IAM tool, you can have more automation. You may have connectors to your existing applications. You may already have several applications onboarded. But as I told you earlier, you're really limited in terms of scope to the applications that are already onboarded. Whereas within Brainwave software, you can either integrate applications that provide Excel reports for your entitlements, or applications with more standardized data, such as Active Directory, for which we already have lots of experience in integration, or other kinds of business application of vendor applications. It can be in-house, it can be on-premise, it can be a cloud application. We can be able to integrate many kinds of applications. We're also able to include in our data feeding, of course, the extracts from your identity and access management platform. If you want to combine your IAM software and your applications that are already onboarded into your IAM with other applications that may have different technologies. So we're not limited as an IAM tool would be. So that's for the data feeding. If we move forward to the next phase in terms of user experience and role mining in itself, we will provide more analytics than an IAM tool related to your risks in terms of access management. That's what Brainwave is known for. Since Brainwave is a pure player in terms of identity analytics and risks and compliance management. Plus, the interface that we offer has been seen as pretty interactive, pretty fluid by most of our clients that have used this feature, especially one of our clients in the banking industry that gave us some very positive feedback on it, saying that it was pretty easy to play with, pretty interactive. Plus, we offer some monitoring on the role mining process itself, which you cannot have easily, of course, with a manual role mining approach, and for which an IAM tool could give you some reporting, but they may not have developed it as thoroughly and as profoundly as we may have done it. And when you go beyond the role mining workshops, for the next steps, for the outputs and the use of the roles. So when you use an IAM tool, the easy part is that the roles that your IAM tool is able to create can be published directly within your IAM tool. So that's indeed one of their advantages. But since they're not necessarily complete in terms of number of applications and numbers of permissions, you may not have the required processes in place if you use an IAM tool to generate your roles for provisioning purposes later on. For the use of Excel and other kinds of manual tools, the the time required to create your roles can be quite a handicap, even though it's maybe not as worse, not as bad as it can be with an IAM tool or with an identity analytics tool. But in terms of role quality, you may have trouble operating your Excel file or your SQL database on your own, which of course will risk giving you roles that are not perfect. In terms of role quality and role evolution, your IAM platform may also have issues in terms of quality, since, as I told you earlier, if you have in your IAM tool accesses that are not relevant and that were given to all users in the same team because users request the same accesses as their manager or as their colleague when they arrive, then you will have these kinds of duplicates turned into roles, even though they may not be necessary or even though they may be obsolete. So that's the kind of issues that we're able to avoid with Brainwave software when the first phase of data integration has been conducted properly, of course.
Yeah, so what we can see here is that Brainwave is providing more value than just the single addition of a manual model Excel or plus the IAM tool. But mainly it's probably because of the core identity, core features, core activities of Brainwave being on top of an IAM tool and seeing much further than just the applications and resources that are embedded within the IAM tool. And Brainwave has been focusing on access analysis, identity analysis since the beginning of, for maybe 10 years or more. So it's really dedicated in providing value, analyzing identities and accesses. So that's why I think the 5-star are really important, and that's why we can be proud of this rating. What we saw during this presentation is being careful of not using data mining algorithm to blindly create roles without analyzing them, without analyzing the content of the roles, see if they are relevant for the business teams, see if they are understood by the business teams. So what we suggest, of course, is to use analytics just simply to feed the workshops and to make them more effective and more relevant, and to ensure that the content of the role is relevant and it's what we expected. Second item, we shouldn't, it's a good practice not to try to assign all rights using business roles. So we wouldn't reach the case of having more roles than users. It's something that has been seen before. So the idea is, of course, to have less roles than rights to manage. So that's why we suggest to keep in mind the Pareto law, which is saying that we could manage like 80% of the access rights with only 20% of roles. So we should we need to keep in mind that the main one of the main objectives of role mining is of a role mining project is to have fewer management action to manage the accesses. And last one is to have roles with we need to have an owner for each role to ensure that and to have a sponsor to manage the project to ensure that the role is still relevant, is still used, and still and that the content of the role is still relevant for, of course, for the business and for the business teams.
Sure. So after what we've seen, if you manage to come up with a role model that can be exploited quickly after the project steps we advised you, you may think of what's coming next, what you can do beyond just creating a role model for your organization. The answer to the question what's next can depend on what your job is, what your profile is, and what your requirements are. If you're part of an audit or compliance team within your company, the next steps for you might be, for example, to set up some role governance or some access review related to the roles that have been created specifically. If you're an information security officer, you may be interested in expanding the scope of role mining to create, for example, IT roles for your outsourcing providers, your technical staff, and other kinds of teams who handle sensitive entitlements, or handling the evolution of your roles. For example, if you're in charge of your IT legacy, if you need to ensure that older applications are replaced with newer ones, then you will need, of course, to take that into account in your role model and update them with the entitlements of the newer applications. And if you're an application owner yourself, if you're responsible for SAP, for Sage, for any kinds of other business application, once a role model has been established, you might be interested in setting up some automated provisioning so that your users can have automatically access to your application once a role is granted to them. You could also be interested in raising awareness and performing change management to your own users in order to give them a more efficient way of requesting access to your application through the role model precisely. So all that can, of course, come as a question and be included in your respective roadmaps after your role model has been created and published. And of course, when you start creating a small role model for an organization, for a specific team, you might also want to, but that's relevant for everybody, you might also want to expand the number of organizations for which you want to create roles and roll them out.
Thank you. And so we reached the end of this presentation. So it's time for questions. So I see that we have quite a lot of questions coming. We may not have the time to answer all the questions, but we'll see what we can do. So just to remind you, we have this session in 2 weeks' time to demonstrate our new role mining as a service platform. You can register on our website on brainwavegrc.com/resources/webinar. So you will find a link if you want to. Adija, I have a first question here. What if I can't onboard business stakeholders? I guess this question is related to the context when it's not easy to handle workshops with the business teams.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting question, especially due to our current pandemic situation. Actually, we've had a couple of clients who were in that situation over the last few months. And so what was possible was to still implement Brainwave software for the consulting firm who handled the role mining project for that client, so that they could at least integrate and load the application data within the software and create themselves their crosstab. So they basically came up with a role model. So, of course, without the perspective of the business stakeholders, which has, of course, been one of their frustrations. So you may not end up with roles that are 100% relevant to an organization, but at least you can come up with some roles and some entitlement rules that can be identified and that can be presented at least to your sponsor, to your project manager within the company, to your client, and you can then consider presenting them to business stakeholders later on after the role mining has been performed. That's, of course, not what we recommend. But if the circumstances make it impossible for you to have workshops with your business stakeholders, it's still possible to at least use our software without that and wait for a better time to have these workshops.
Yes, thank you. I have another one for you. Not sure. How does our tool handle the role explosion? I guess it's related to the wrap up when we mentioned that we shouldn't, we should be careful of not creating too many roles, keeping in mind the Pareto law.
What was the last word of the question? Sorry, I didn't hear that very well.
How does the tool handle the role explosion?
Explosion?
Explosion. I guess maybe multiplication.
Okay, sure. So as we showed you earlier with the screenshot of our role mining features, we have some reporting and some KPIs related to the level of coverage of the roles that you have created during your project. So that can be actually pretty helpful in checking, in identifying when the roles you're starting to create are becoming less relevant or are starting to cover fewer people and fewer entitlements. As I said, if the software is able to tell you, okay, you created 5 or 6 roles and you already covered 80% of the entitlements within that team, then going beyond these 5 or 6 roles may not be relevant, since it will basically become creating one role for each entitlement that could be granted on its own. We're not advocating actually for having all your rights granted only through roles. So Nicolas, I believe that's one of the do's and don'ts that you exposed in the latest slides, and that's the kind of risk that our software wants to help you avoid, actually.
Yes, thank you. And maybe we have time for one last question. My IAM vendor provides a role with a role mining module. Should I use it? Huh.
Yeah, that can be a pretty tricky question. So if you have within your company an identity and access management tool from one of the most famous vendors, some of them may have in their catalog a role mining feature. So as I told you, they can help you identify from your existing clusters what you have and what you can turn into roles. But there are quite a few prerequisites for that to work. First, you have to onboard several applications in your IAM platform If you only have 4 or 5, if you're at the beginning of your IAM journey, or if your applications are not technically suitable for an IAM connector, it may not be helpful enough. The second part is that more often than not, these IAM vendors sell their role mining modules as additional licenses, as options with their own subscription costs. So if you already bought them, and if you already have hundreds of applications within your IAM platform with entitlements that are clearly documented, with all your workflows that are going through the IAM platform, then yeah, it can be a suitable option. But I'd like to make it clear that not all clients who have an IAM platform have reached this level of maturity and this level of quality within their data, within their IAM platform, within their implementation, where the use of the IAM role mining modules can be relevant enough for them. Plus, we've often had feedbacks from Brainwave clients where their role mining projects could be conducted pretty quickly. So we can, of course, adapt our implementation. And if you don't want to implement a big infrastructure, that can be used on a specific sandbox or on your consultants' laptops. That's something we can provide for, so that you can have your 3-month role mining project and then use your role model to do something else.
Thank you, Khadija. I think we reached the end of this presentation, the end of the session. We are running out of time. I can see that some other questions are coming, but don't hesitate to send them to us later on. We'll for sure answer to your question later on. So we'll send you the link of the replay. So if you missed some information, you can rewatch the replay. And don't forget to register to the next session to have the full vision of our new Brainwave as a Service module. Thank you, everyone, and I wish you a very good afternoon or very good evening, depending on where you are in the globe. And bye. Thank you, Khadija, and I hope to see you soon with us on these on the Brainwave webinars. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Nicolas. Thank you to everyone, and have a nice rest of the day.